It may be autumn in the UK and the weather may be unpredictable, but we can always rely on Search Press to bring us a lovely new art book. And here I have Charles Evans Watercolour Rescue, top tips for correcting your mistakes and preventing them in the first place. Now this is a lovely A5 size book, 128 pages covering over 70 common mistakes. So on the back cover it says, lift your watercolour paintings from mess to masterpiece. Over his years as an artist and demonstrator, Charles Evans has picked up a wealth of watercolour tips, tricks and techniques. In this compact little handbook for artists of all abilities, he explores over 70 common mistakes and provides remedies and rescues for each, based on his vast experience and knowledge. Now, I am a huge fan of Charles Evans. Back in 2004 and 2005, before we had internet at home, I used to watch watercolours with Charles Evans on television. And my son used to watch with me. We was both so impressed with Charles and his relaxed and friendly style and his useful tips on improving painting. And since then, I've watched Charles in many online classes and videos, both watercolour and acrylic painting. And Charles has a wonderful way of simplifying tricky subjects to improve your painting. So I'm going to have a little look inside this book. We have a picture of Charles Evans. It's always nice to see the author and artist. And we have a dedication to Gail, a Gail who has been one of my long-standing students and basically inspired the book. Well, I hope this book has helped you, Gail. It must be really lovely to have the book dedicated to you. And we have on the contents, introduction, where to get help, equipment, techniques and composition, colour mixing and water control, achieving realism in nature and buildings and structures, endgame and index. So we have a little bit of introduction here by Charles, and he says this is not a step-by-step book, it's more of a generalised guide to getting down on paper what you have in your mind. So it's not designed to be read in one go, although you can do that. It's more for you to search through and locate your particular problem as you paint. Now I have read it through in one go because I wanted to talk about the book, but it is definitely a book that I will come back to and dip into as my problems occur, which they often do with my watercolour painting. So we have a section here where we have these lovely little picture contents, and it tells you choosing your tools and materials, colour choice, watercolour paper, working with watercolours, achieving realism in nature, composition and sketching, techniques, washes, realism in buildings and man-made structures, and finished painting. So it's very easy to see where you want to go next. So we start off with equipment and colours, mixing colours, difference between artist colours and students' colours. So many handy little tips here. When I first started using masking fluid, I really didn't like it at all, but here's a way to avoid messing up your brushes. Any problem that you can think of with watercolour painting, you will find an answer in this book. How to make clouds. I found clouds incredibly difficult when I started watercolour painting. So all sorts of things like waterlogged paper, smudging, using watercolour pencils, what to do if your objects look flat. And we have techniques and composition. This is another thing that is very hard when you start off, getting your gradiated wash, and oh my goodness, it can be so difficult. My flat wash isn't flat. I've forgotten to leave white paper for detail. I can't make sense of working from light to dark. What to do when your picture just doesn't look right. Balance in your picture. And we have colour mixing and water control. Getting cauliflowers in the sky. Oh dear, yes, I had a few of those when I started out. So I mainly use watercolour with mixed media, but I really long to do beautiful landscape pictures, and this is a book that is really so useful. How to improve your dark sky, how to avoid it. So avoiding is obviously the key. If you can learn how to avoid a mistake, it makes life a lot easier. So this book is not just showing you how to improve your mistakes, but how to avoid them in the first place. Achieving realism in nature. So throughout the book we have examples of how not to do this and how to do them. And something that I found very useful as well is we've not got to the page quite yet. Trees that look like lollipops. Very hard as well. You need to really look at things, but sometimes even when you're really looking at a subject, you don't really know how to actually put that subject down on paper. And this is a type of book that really shows you how to avoid making the mistakes. We have an interesting bit on working from photos. It's very difficult with a photo to know which elements to keep into your picture and which you don't need. How to bring some life in. And this is something else I found with, I work quite detailed, and when I was trying to put birds in the sky, they were looking like sort of flappy dishcloths, and I was really messing up. And this is something I remember from the television programs, of making your birds in the sky look right, making animals in the field look the right size by simplifying everything. Oh yes, how to paint a perfect circle for a sun or moon. So you're going to need that in your landscape pictures at some time. Distance, getting the shadows in the right place. My figures don't look right. Now this is another thing. My figures weren't quite like that, but I just was putting too much detail in. And when you're putting figures into a landscape, Charles helped me understand you don't need lots of detail. You can simplify them. I'm always just trying to put features on the faces and everything, but you know, you don't need it. As Charles says here, for people in the distance, you can paint the faces as simple blobs. Right? That didn't even occur to me when I first started doing landscapes. So painting a crowd of people, that was also something I found very difficult. But thanks to Charles, he's made me look at my painting in a totally different manner, to stop looking and trying to paint my watercolours as detailed and every little detail as I did in my pen and ink. And this is something as well that I found really useful. My paths have sharp edges, and Charles explains to you how simple it is by painting your path in first, that you're going to create a much softer edge. Ripples and waves on water. I also found out something in this book as well, that Charles has his own sand coloured paint, which I didn't realise, and it can be purchased from his website. So if you go to Charles Evans Arts, you can purchase his very own range of his tube of sand paint. Charles actually represents Dale Rowney now, so you can also find a lot about Charles on the Dale Rowney website. Here Gail is an example of Gail's painting, where her reflections don't match the shape of the object. So Charles will talk about, it says, my reflections look like they're stuck on, how to avoid it. So we're coming to the end of this lovely little book now. I think it really is a great book just to dip into. So we come to the end game. So what you've done your painting, you can't see where it could be improved on. What happens next? So Charles talks about protecting your painting, getting it framed, and then we come to the index. So there we go, a lovely little book by Charles Evans.